So we're over here for your.
Oh yeah. We'll do a little commercial spot right over here. So then I'm gonna have to do this, and then maybe so that's okay. Hey, yeah. There we go. How's that? Perfect. Uh, this week's episode is brought to you by Focus V with the Carta 2 and the Dab Saber attachment. And this week's hash is brought to you by Hash and Flowers. Cody, have you had the Hash and Flowers rosin yet?
Well, I've been dabbing what you have for a few hours now.
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually try it out right now. And have you used this thing, the saber?
The saber.
You know what a saber to me is like.
Yeah, I feel like
I am your father. You know.
Yeah,
like
that's fair. I mean, it gets hot, so.
Well, I
makes
see.
Sense.
What was the line? I see your Schwartz is as big as mine.
Whose line was that?
You're fucking 12 years old. This is exactly what happens every single time. I'm just going to look right to the audience right now and tell them. This is what happens when there's moments in popular culture and reference. I see your Schwartz is as big as mine. It was Dark Helmet in Spaceballs.
Spaceballs. Right. Yeah. I did see Spaceballs.
Yeah,
it's just been, I don't know, 15 years.
No, but Spaceballs lyrics are
right. They're timeless.
They're timeless. Anyway, I just loaded up your dab with the Saber by Focus V and the Carta 2. It should be ready to go.
Try it out.
It's kind of good, right?
Yeah, getting that nice bubble audio.
You were actually getting the ASMR.
Exactly.
Wow.
You gotta give them a show at home, you know.
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah, this week's episode is brought to you by Focus V. That's Show Me the Money, our sponsor. But they have actually sponsored me several times. First of all, they showed me love when others didn't.
Mm-hmm. It's nice.
Second of all, they have actually dropped off a bunch of these rigs for us to use in the studio. They came to the Bob Marley experience and have set up a whole dab bar with, actually we should pair the Focus V Carta with the Rosin Tech. That's their house brand, and they make really good dabs. But, you got to mix it up a little. We're on the Hash and Flowers today.
Well, I swear you can't smoke the same thing all the time.
No, but when
Stop getting high.
When you find that thing just keeps going. I don't know what happened.
No, I did it again.
Oh, you loaded it again
because it wasn't done.
All right, well,
you put a big dab in there for me, which is great. That's what I want.
For you watching at home, you always clean your dab rig. And there's even more in there. But
yeah,
I don't know if we're gonna do. I think 2 is probably the limit before you kind of burn off your terps.
Don't want to Chaz the banger.
Yeah. I'm going to plug this back in. There we go. So Cody, how did you first come upon the chemistry?
So I wanted to do biology. Went to college. Was decent at chemistry, and just realized I really wanted to get into pharmacology, right? Because I had tried these drugs, getting out of high school, and I was really fascinated. And I'd always had a fascination with consciousness, but drugs change consciousness in such a fundamental way that I was especially intrigued. And so I went to college, asked my professors if anybody knew anything about cannabinoids, because I saw cannabinoids as the future of medicinal compounds.
Mm-hmm.
And none of my
professors.
professors.
Was this, just for reference, because cannabis science has changed so much over time? Take me to where.
This is 2012.
Okay.
So there was already a fair amount of research, mostly coming out of Israel.
Yeah.
Israel never really stopped doing research. And so there was plenty of stuff to read on the internet. Not much was happening in the US.
Yeah.
You have NIDA, which is the, federal farm, but
Yeah.
it's like notorious for being like terrible cannabis that's
Yeah.
completely unrepresentative of like
Well, the thing with NIDA, it's the National Institute for Drug Abuse, right? So in order to get, well, first of all, they grow and supply the weed, right? It's in Mississippi,
Yeah, I believe
right?
so.
For what, 12 patients that were grandfathered in for glaucoma and a bunch of different diseases.
Yeah.
They get the right. LV Musica was one.
Yeah.
Was the one I used to. I actually met LV in 2014, and she and had Bob Randall was the first patient, patient zero, and his wife, widow Alice O'Leary Randall, is still out there and writing books. And I met Alice in 2014 at the Patients at a Time conference, which was like, you know, while everyone was trying to do with the industry, Patients at a Time came from Normal, and it was the researchers that were like, you know, the hippies basically. So, but these were actually the actual scientists that discovered the cannabinoids and discovered how, you know, they impact cancerous cells, and just like a lot of the pockets of research that were happening in different parts of the world, Israel, as you mentioned. I actually have in my archive in the other room, you know, people see those tins.
Yeah.
With all the joints in them.
Right.
Before the tins, it was a plastic, like, prescription. It looked like almost like an old Band-Aids tin, you know, with the lid, but it was clear plastic, and it says Bob Randall on it. I have one of Bob Randall's like first, I think there was maybe 12 cannabis cigarettes, it says, or marijuana cigarettes spelled all funky or some shit like that. So what was it? It was so 2012.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And what happened? Like, where were you going to school?
ASU, down in Arizona.
And did ASU have any one there that knew anything about cannabis science?
No, the medical program in Arizona, I think, started in 2009. So it was like very fresh that there was like even medical in the state. So like certainly the university didn't have any participation of any kind. There wasn't really any research being done at ASU.
Is that where you were, ASU?
Yeah.
It's crazy, man. I got accepted to ASU. I almost went to Arizona. I remember you remember when you're a senior in high school, you have a yearbook and you have a senior quote. And I was into the Grateful Dead. My senior picture is probably me with like a tie-dye, you know, long hair. Yeah. And my senior quote was from a song called "Going Down the Road Feeling Bad," and it's going where the climate suits my clothes. But they fucked up and wrote "Going where the climate fits my clothes." Now, either they were fucking with me, the yearbook people, because I was like, you know, maybe not nice to them, and you know, I wasn't a small lad, or they just made a typo and I made it all like, you know, took it personally.
Right.
Well, you don't want to fuck up someone's senior quote, man. You know what I mean? Anyway, I almost went to ASU, Cody.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't stay long. Nobody knew anything about cannabinoids, so I was like.
So how'd you get your was it self-research?
Yeah, so I went up to Mendocino and met a friend, my friend Marvin, who helped start the Emerald Cup back in the day. So he was like fairly well connected in the cannabis scene, and he had a friend who was starting a laboratory, and his friend was David Pate, who was the head scientist for GW Pharmaceutical. And so I met him and was a big fan. You know, learned about all of his research. He was able to do research at the federal level, while most scientists like were not doing anything related here in the US.
Wasn't GW though?
They started in the UK.
Europe?
Yeah. So eventually he went to the Netherlands and started a company called Hortifarm, which specialized in like single cannabinoid cannabis plants that they were then going to like use for pharmaceutical research. And so then
hold on, let me just get this straight. They were breeding cannabis plants that were only forming one cannabinoid, like they did.
Yeah, or none at all.
They were successful in this? Interesting.
Yeah. And so
like what? Like THC only, or was it CBD? And then I've
yeah,
never
there were
even
multiple different cannabinoids. Yeah, I don't remember the exact array, but THC and CBD were definitely
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And so then they went to the UK and made a deal with the UK government where Hortifarm was providing genetics and plants and material. And the UK was they allowed it to become a pharmaceutical company, specifically doing cannabinoid research.
Were they always called Hortifarm?
In the Netherlands? The flower company specifically, I believe, was always Hortifarm.
There's something called Bendo something, or Bendocrin or Bendocran.
Oh, Bedrocan.
Yeah. What was that?
Yeah, so Bedrocan is basically the Netherlands medical supplier for cannabis products.
Okay.
Yeah, they have a monopoly for.
Okay.
They proudly have a monopoly for the Netherlands. The government granted them a monopoly. To Americans, it's a very weird situation.
Interesting.
So the Netherlands system is it's very strange. Culturally, the whole cannabis situation there is rather strange.
Yeah. Well, my first cannabis cup was in '94, and in the '90s, it was especially coming out of, greenhouses and tulips and flower markets and whatnot. You think of Holland as a place of plant growth.
Yeah.
Now, what a contrast going in back in 2014. It's my last cannabis cup. Mm-hmm. And then it seems like in the last, 8 years or so, the US has just almost surpassed.
Oh yeah, certainly.
But back in the day, it wasn't like that.
No, I would say since the early 2000s, California's had a global, cultural monopoly on cannabis and really on every aspect of cannabis except for high-end research, which has always been best in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
The commercial side of cannabis, since the early 2000s.
So what happened with GW?
So GW is still around. I mean, they produce cannabinoid medicines.
But I mean, your relationship.
Well, I never really had a relationship with GW.
That? Whose phone is that? Is that mine? Is it mine? That's you got a cookie? You got a swear jar? Is that me? All right, it's me. It's Cody.
No, that wasn't
me. It's me. Get out of here. Where? Oh, well, I don't know who it is, but my shit's on. All right, well, I'll take it. It's me, man. Hang on, I'm putting this on DND. DND until I leave this location. Wow. All right, here we go. I don't know how that was me, but here we are. Here we are. We'll do a station ID. You know what that is?
No.
It's you are listening to Pinsky in the Brain with this week's brain, Cody Gibbons, coming to you live, but not live, from Green Street in DTLA, Los Angeles. And we're back with Cody Gibbons on the show. That's what a station ID is. When it's WNBC.
Right.
When they the FCC used to make radio stations have to identify who they were verbally every hour or whatever. So there would be a station call. That's where a jingle comes in, dun dun dun, or something like that. Know? We need one for
absolutely
for Pinsky in the Brain. What would it sound like to you?
The jingle?
Yeah.
Ugh, I'm terrible at jingles. I'm not musically inclined whatsoever.
All right, so bring us back, Cody. You met the lead chemist.
Yeah, who had left GW.
Okay.
They didn't get along.
Yeah.
And he left. He was working in Oakland. And I had just moved to the Bay. And so I had just essentially dropped out of college to try and learn cannabinoid science.
And you found the guy.
And I found the guy. And so I did. I dropped out and moved to the Bay and worked in that lab for a while and essentially asked him a lot of questions. And, they just allowed me. I worked for free.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much the beginning. And I've always been like very autodidactic. I can consume a lot of information and like retain a lot of it. And I've always been pretty fortunately gifted in that way. And so, I just spent a couple of years reading a ton of papers, and asking him a bunch of questions and like working in the lab. And that was sort of my beginning to being a cannabinoid scientist,
Right.
which like at the time there was no degree for. Like now there's like some actual university.
Bring me like, I mean, like assuming that anyone who's watching knows about cannabis chemistry or analytics or testing or, dive deeper. Like, what was some of the, like these days, a lot of the science, right, is extraction, isolating compounds, right, whether they're terpenes or cannabinoids, right, formulations, making, but just like, that was my kind of like, path toward cannabis chemistry was through like, like being able to take the flower and make dabs at it.
Sure.
What were some of the things that you were working on back then? Was it the same type of thing, like hash making, or was it more scientific?
Well, yeah, we were doing specifically cannabinol CBN conversions.
Okay.
Back in 2013, 2014, before that was like ever really a thing.
Yeah.
We sold to like research groups. Probably 3 or 4 years before it was like ever commercialized as like a
and were you guys had your own in-house analytics, so you were able to like prove what you were doing? Did you have to then sometimes like take what you made and have another third party test it, or what was it?
I think there were analytics later, like while I was there. Eventually there were analytics in-house, but in the beginning it was definitely like through other analytical labs.
It's always been interesting in terms of product development and like, being able to like, do an experiment and then test for it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, yeah, it's very useful. You want to be able to know if you actually produced what you wanted to produce.
Yeah. You were doing stuff for High Times though when we met. How did that move?
Yeah, so shortly after I started working in that lab, I found out that my friend's family owned High Times.
Okay.
And I was like, what? And yeah, I just essentially got a nice invite to like start, coming to the cups and helping out behind the scenes with voting and like
that's what I thought. We must have like, like connected or indirectly, because I was judging cannabis cups 2014, 15, 16.
Yeah. So I started like the end of 2013, the last cup of 2013. I think it was San Bernardino.
Yeah.
And
that was San Bernardino was the beginning of 2014. That was my first cup.
Yeah.
Was my first one after 20 years. The first one was in 94, but the first time I came back was judging concentrates for the cannabis cup. So maybe it was there.
Yeah. Did you go to the Denver cups? Those were huge.
Yeah. The Denver one was later that year on 420.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was Denver 2014, I think, was like 40,000 people. And then Denver 2015 was like 50,000 people.
Yeah.
I worked both of those events, like doing gift bags and like just putting things together, so being the High Times merchandise tent. And like, yeah, that was me. So
how did that like exactly like, when I think of you, it is actually as a cannabinoid scientist, but also I think of you like, in a expanded capacity when it comes to other compounds.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, all pharmacology. I'm like brains, drugs, plants.
What are the things that you're like, your focus? At one point we talked a little bit about like understanding the brain chemistry and how the brain reacts, to different compounds, being able to alter that. Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, what I really like to talk about is sort of the brain-mind interface, right? Like what activity in the brain can be like highly correlated to the phenomenology in the mind. And understanding like how a substance or a drug goes into the brain and creates like such a, vastly different experience, like a different setting for your mind. Those are generally the things I focus on, the mechanisms of psychoactivity. Why does something make you feel different? How does it make you feel different? And how can we like explore that more and understand better how to interact with our brains to like produce the effects in our mind that we want to?
What's the let me just pause for a second. Toy, is that audio coming in upstairs? Can you hear that?
Not enough to disturb us.
Okay. It's just driving me crazy.
Yeah.
It's okay. As long as it's not going to like ruin what we're doing, you know what I'm saying?
I just actually turned up, so just quietly as we're it's like.
Can you? Oh, you turned up us?
Turned up your mic. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
great.
All right.
So we're good. I mean, I can hear it, but it doesn't disturb.
Okay.
You guys are way
We're in there?
in the house.
All right. It's Pinsky in the Brain. We're here with this week's brain, Cody Gibbons, and we're discussing psychedelic pharmacology. What is it?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, it's not traditional psychopharmacology, but
It's psychedelic pharmacology.
it's psychedelic pharmacology. Yeah, indeed. It really, I mean, I think it will sort of become its own lane of pharmacology research.
So how do you know? Like, a lot of the weed research was done with small populations of people, was mostly anecdotal, was not using consistent inputs, right? So, and then you have like, like a double-blind study, right? Like the right way to actually, or a scientific way, where there's control groups and there's a larger population and there's a more precise and consistent way of not only of your inputs but also of measuring your outputs.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the psychedelic research community? Like, what's measuring these things now?
Yeah, like in terms of like the methods or the machines.
Yeah, I guess like, I think of I think I just saw like a Johns Hopkins ad, and like, I don't know who's leading their program, but it was the dude, or the woman or whoever it was that was leading their like psychedelic research.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're like putting people on mushrooms and then sticking them in a fucking MRI. Or
yeah,
like,
in some cases,
like,
yeah, certainly.
Like, so that to me is like, okay, that's a real research, or feels like it anyway, right? Where a lot of the other pockets of research feel like they're more subjective or more anecdotal. So where is that at these days?
Yeah, it's interesting. I personally don't believe we're ever going to find much through, MRIs or EKG readings, these skull helmets, because it's either looking at electrical activity or it's looking at blood flow.
Mm-hmm.
And those are really the only two ways we look at the brain in like a quantitative analytical sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not giving us the answers we want. And there's, I think, a new way to look at it. There's a scientist, Tom Ray, who sort of looks at some aspects of the brain more through patterns of receptor populations on cells and how those nerve bundles or nerve populations like sort of stretch throughout the mind, and understanding how different compounds are interacting with those receptors and like trying to measure that and potentially visualize that is going to be a lot more useful than simple blood flow or electrical activity.
Almost also like, the when you're thinking about the applications of psychedelic medicine, things like depression. Depression is like not measured. Like there's no machine that measures your level of depression. That's like a very personalized and almost like the type of thing that needs to be measured by someone's verbal response, or like, you know what I mean, versus like a machine.
Right.
So maybe the psychedelic research it needs to be anecdotal for it to be effective.
Yeah, well, I think that people forget that there's like mental health problems like depression are a problem that is within the synergistic component that is the mind, right? So we can't really boil down the mind to like any specific part of the brain. So we can't really boil down depression to any specific part of the brain. There are certainly like forms of depression that come from like small biological triggers that like can potentially be reversed. But I think for the most part, it's like if you try to look at the problem of world hunger and you say, well, what is like a single component in the system that is like society that we can change to like fix world hunger? And the thing is, like, there is no one like single mechanism. There's not like a single part of society that we can treat simply and then it fixes world hunger. It's like we have to we have to change many aspects of like foundationally what is happening in society to fix a societal problem that is, bigger than any one thing. So I think it's similar. It's like you can't fix something that is contained within a higher level of complexity with something on the lower level of complexity, right? So like you have to treat problems at complexity levels that they are contained within. And so to say like, oh, let's fix this big problem that's an aggregate problem of society as a whole is not feasible unless you're fixing like a major portion of society.
I'm totally lost with what you said.
That's fine.
I was going to glaze over it, and I was going to be like, "Oh, okay." And that moving, but actually, I want to actually understand what you mean, like because you went down the hunger analogy, but we were talking about depression,
Right?
So,
like depression is your brain is a large biological system, and it produces an additional like level of complexity, like a system of a magnitude of complexity that is higher. So these are like different levels of complexity. It like, starts with like a single celled organism, right? Then you have a multicellular organism, and then you have like something that can produce consciousness. And consciousness is like, it can often appear to us as simple because it's a lot of complex components coming together to create something that is like ideally supposed to seem simple on on the level of complexity above it. Do you follow?
I'm not gonna lie and say yes. I mean, like, yeah, no, I okay, but how does that relate back to like depression or your
right? So like people try to treat depression with like a pill.
Right.
That's like that's not how it works.
Okay.
That's like trying to fix world hunger with just like, oh, produce some more food.
Okay.
Well, hey, turns out, in addition to producing more food, you have to transport it everywhere. You have to make sure it's distributed well, fairly. It doesn't go bad. There's, like, it's not that simple.
I got it. What is happening with like why what's happening with, start that over again. What exactly is happening with the brain that makes different psychedelic compounds effective for like mental health?
So different psychedelics interact with different receptors. And essentially, I believe how our mind works is a whole bunch of receptor activity can be treated sort of like, you know, for a computer guy, code, right? So like the way these different keys fit into their locks, the different molecules fit into receptors, they're essentially creating zeros and ones. I mean, obviously, like it's incredibly more complex than zeros and ones, but like it's producing something that can then be construed or constructed into consciousness. And so by like poking these different things, we're like affecting the system. And sorry, I forget what the initial question was.
I guess my curiosity is like, why do psychedelics help with depression? Or like, you know, why do we see MDMA research right now with maps and it's like, you know, being geared toward like, you know, mental health? Or why do we see like, you know, why do we hear about what's happening at Johns Hopkins or with psilocybin and you know, there's this narrative about like how a heroic dose can lock up your default node network and force your brain to create new neuropathic highways. What's happening there? Like, you know, like what it seems like a very
in truth, nobody has like any idea. The thing is like we're dealing with consciousness. And like there's no consensus to like any aspect of consciousness. There's like some overarching beliefs due to some like really strong experiments in terms of like the prediction of consciousness and how like most of what we see and experience is like heavily influenced by like a prediction capability of our brain. And that sort of relates to the default mode network. Like,
oh, it's default mode.
Yeah.
Not default node.
Correct. Yeah. Default mode network.
I should not butcher that.
Yeah.
The default. So what is the default?
So it's called the default mode network because they noticed that it is a like between when they put people in the MRIs and they ask them to do things like picture this or imagine this or don't think about anything, right? In the time between these tasks, the brain would return to what they call a default state where you're just chilling, right? You're in the MRI, you don't have a current task, so it's just like just hang out. And so that's what they're referencing. And they believe that this has some hold, like this has some relation to like a constriction to your consciousness. So like the stronger your default mode network, the higher like your brain's trying to predict things. And it's just going to predict things comfortably and not be surprised. And that sort of strengthens the default mode network. And so people get stuck in these like loops or like just like very like not like very specific consciousness states. And one of those can be depression.
So my understanding of how this works is that like humans are creatures of habit. And when you have something that you do on a regular basis and then it becomes like a pattern, and then it becomes like then when it like gets committed to muscle memory, like then it becomes like like part of your personality, like, you know, like something that you do or part of your routine. You know, you change something, then you repeat it, you do it repeatedly, and then it becomes like ingrained in you.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me was what I, thought of as this default mode network. It's like your state of mind almost.
Yeah.
So in the case of depression, like when you have these negative thoughts or different things that loop in your body or in your mind rather, right? And I always thought of it think of it you ever see the videos of the information superhighway, where it's all these pathways and all these
Mhm.
data things moving through, and you can equate that to your Google Maps, the way you go to work every day. I get on the 10, I get off at Grand, I make a left on Hill Street, it's
Mhm.
the same thing, the same route and routine.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, what they're saying is that if you get so fucking high off mushrooms that your brain is almost like scramble sauce for the time that you're tripping balls. And because you're so scrambled, it's literally forces your brain to create new pathways,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. I mean, that's, a somewhat accurate analogy. Yeah.
So the question was how is this? Now we'll just take you back full triangle, right? The question is, how do you know? And we talked about two things, right? One is how they look at it in an MRI,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the second is because you have a gang of people who are like, yeah, I trip balls on mushrooms and I feel great.
Yeah.
It's really interesting stuff. I think we should drink some mushroom tea and come back in 5 minutes. It's Pinsky in the Brain. We're here with Cody Gibbons, and he's my psychedelic chemist friend and research lead. And we'll be back after these words from Focus V. And we're going to do some dabs off the Focus V card. And here we go. How we doing, Toy?
Doing good.
I didn't realize the time goes fast, right?
Yeah, we're at 45 minutes.